The strange thing wasn't the letter itself. It was the timing. That's what immediately caught people's attention over the last couple of days. Not because anyone officially confirmed a romance between Princess Leonor and Prince Christian, but because a private message, a quiet gesture, and a very carefully timed public reaction suddenly made royal watchers across Europe start asking the same question. Wait, are these two actually much closer than the palaces want us to believe? And honestly, I think the conversation exploded because people are tired of the fake distance royal institutions always try to create around young heirs. The modern audience doesn't buy that polished mystery anymore. Especially not in 2026. Because now every interaction gets analyzed frame by frame. Every seating arrangement becomes a theory. Every handwritten note, every smile, every subtle glance suddenly becomes evidence. And this week, one particular detail changed everything. According to several royal observers online, attention suddenly shifted to a hidden letter reportedly connected to recent private exchanges involving Leonor and Christian. Not officially published, not formally acknowledged, but heavily discussed enough that people immediately started connecting dots the palace probably hoped would stay disconnected. Now before people jump to conclusions, let me say this clearly. I'm not here to claim there's some secret royal engagement happening behind closed doors. That's not the point. Actually, I think the real story is much more interesting than gossip. The real story is why the public desperately wants this relationship narrative to be true in the first place. That's the deeper conversation nobody's talking about. Because modern royalty survives on emotional investment now. Not distance. Not mystery. Not stiff protocol. Emotion. And Leonor and Christian together represent something royal institutions desperately need in 2026, relatability. If you're new to Leonor's story, subscribe, I post every day. Now here's where my hot take probably differs from the usual royal coverage. I don't think people are obsessed with Leonor and Christian simply because of romance speculation. I think audiences are projecting something much bigger onto them. Hope. Think about it. European monarchies right now are all facing the same problem. How do you remain culturally relevant to younger generations who didn't grow up automatically respecting institutions? That's the real challenge. And suddenly these younger royals, Leonor, Christian, even figures like Prince George slowly entering public consciousness, are being treated less like distant royal figures and more like characters in a long-form global story people emotionally follow online. That changes everything. Years ago, royal coverage was formal, predictable, almost untouchable. Now, it works more like fandom culture. And honestly, that's exactly why this hidden letter conversation spread so fast online. Because people aren't just analyzing facts anymore. They're building emotional narratives around the future of monarchy itself. And Leonor sits directly at the center of that shift. What fascinates me is how carefully both royal households seem to handle these interactions publicly. Very controlled, very measured, almost strategically vague. And to me, that usually signals awareness. Not necessarily confirmation of anything romantic, but awareness that the public is paying attention to the dynamic. And honestly, how could they not be? You have two young future monarchs from highly visible European royal families growing up under global scrutiny during the social media era. That combination alone creates fascination automatically. But here's the part one think most commentators are missing. Completely. The hidden letter matters less than what people believe it represents. Connection. That's what audiences are really reacting to. In a world where institutions feel increasingly cold and distant, people crave stories that feel emotionally human. And whether intentional or not, Leonor and Christian together create that emotional illusion perfectly. There's also a huge media strategy angle here nobody talks about openly. Royal families today compete for attention in the same digital ecosystem as celebrities, influencers, athletes, even YouTubers. That sounds ridiculous at first, until you realize it's true. Attention is currency now, and younger royals generate attention differently from previous generations. Not through authority, through personality. That's why Leonor's military training clips spread faster than traditional ceremonies. That's why candid moments matter more than official speeches. And honestly, that's why speculation around Christian keeps growing. Because emotionally driven stories outperform formal royal updates every single time online. If Mr. Beast were somehow consulting European monarchies right now, which would honestly be hilarious, he'd probably tell them the exact same thing every major creator understands: audiences return for emotional continuity. People want evolving storylines. And Leonor's storyline right now is transitioning from future queen to Young woman navigating pressure, identity, visibility, and possible personal relationships under impossible scrutiny. That's incredibly compelling to audiences. But it's also dangerous for the palace. Because emotional investment creates expectations. And expectations can become traps. That's why I think the royal households are probably being extremely cautious right now about public appearances, interactions, and messaging. Not because there's necessarily a scandal, but because they understand how quickly narratives spiral online once audiences emotionally attach themselves to an idea. And honestly, I think some media outlets are feeding that intentionally too. Because let's be real, stories about institutional reform or constitutional duties don't spread like relationship speculation does. Emotion wins the algorithm every time. That's the uncomfortable truth modern monarchies are learning. And I think Queen Letizia especially understands this battle better than many people realize. Remember, Letizia came from journalism and media before entering the monarchy. She understands headlines. She understands narrative framing. She understands how quickly public curiosity turns into obsession. That's why I sometimes wonder if the palace's recent silence around certain rumors is actually strategic. Because denying things directly often amplifies them online now. Silence creates mystery. Mystery creates engagement. Modern royal PR has become incredibly psychological. But here's another angle I haven't heard many people discuss. What if Leonor herself is becoming more comfortable shaping her own image independently from palace tradition? That possibility changes everything, because younger royals today understand media instinctively. They grew up inside the internet era. And Leonor increasingly feels like someone who understands emotional perception very well. Not recklessly, carefully, quietly. That's why every appearance lately feels more intentional somehow. More confident, more relaxed, less rehearsed. And honestly, I think that's one reason audiences connect with her so strongly now compared to a few years ago. She no longer feels like a distant symbol. She feels like someone actively growing in front of the world. That creates emotional attachment. And once audiences emotionally attach themselves to a royal figure, every rumored relationship suddenly becomes part of a much larger narrative about identity, future, and personal freedom. That's why this hidden letter conversation became bigger than a simple rumor almost instantly. People aren't just asking whether Leonor and Christian are close. They're asking whether younger royals can still have authentic personal lives inside systems built on control and image management. That's the real tension underneath all this. Because monarchy in 2026 is no longer just about crowns and ceremonies. It's about balancing humanity with institutional pressure under non-stop global observation. And honestly, I don't think previous generations of royalty ever had to navigate emotional visibility at this level before. That's why even the smallest details now feel massive online. A letter, a glance, a delayed reaction, a carefully timed appearance. The internet turns fragments into narratives almost instantly. And sometimes I think the palaces themselves are still trying to understand how powerful that shift has become. Because once the public emotionally invests in a storyline, it no longer fully belongs to the palace anymore.